Bet you can't read this, the CEO sneered. But when Audra began translating in flawless French, the laughter died. Every word she spoke stripped another layer off his lie, until silence swallowed the boardroom. What no one knew yet was that those same words would bring his empire crashing down. Hello, my beautiful Heartway family. Welcome back. This story was created with so much love, just for you. You are valued, you are seen, and you truly deserve all the joy life still has to offer. Here at Heartway Stories, we believe every heart deserves a little peace, a little comfort, and a lot of love. So, before we begin, take a deep breath, smile, and remind yourself in the comments. Yes, I deserve all the happiness in the world. Audra Rodriguez balanced a stack of catering invoices against her hip, praying the elevator doors wouldn't close before she reached them. She wasn't supposed to be on the 23rd floor, certainly not inside the boardroom where the CEO of Washington Freight was testing his executives like schoolchildren. Bet you can't even read this, Granville Washington laughed, waving a French business proposal like a trophy. The room joined his laughter, polished and expensive. Audra froze at the doorway, the scent of espresso and glass polish thick in the air. The paper fluttered like a dare. He noticed her, a teenage girl in a wrinkled yellow uniform, a company badge half-faded from wear. Maybe our delivery staff can translate, he mocked, his voice dipping in condescension. Since my Ivy League team seems confused. A ripple of laughter followed, sharp and cold. Audra's throat tightened, and then something inside her steadied. Her fingers brushed the small silver locket at her neck, engraved with the words Les Mots Liberant, words set us free. It had been her grandmother's, a reminder of the scholarship Audra once earned, and lost. Actually, she said softly, that document's not what you think it is. Heads turned. Silence tightened like wire. She read aloud, her French crisp and flawless, translating line after line until the CEO's grin vanished. When she finished, no one spoke. A room full of executives, men twice her age and paid 100 times her wage, sat frozen as if the air itself had turned to glass. Granville's voice cracked through the silence. Who are you? Just a delivery girl, she wanted to say. But the words caught somewhere between pride and pain. She stepped back, clutching her invoices. No one important, sir. But every eye in the room said otherwise. As the doors slid shut behind her, Granville turned to his assistant. Find out who that girl is. Audra's world didn't begin in boardrooms or billion-dollar deals. It began in a cramped apartment that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and medication, where her grandmother, Esme, whispered French lullabies to distract from the sound of hospital monitors. Before life clipped her wings, Audra had been the youngest student ever admitted to the International Language Academy. Fluent in 3 languages, fueled by hope, and funded by a scholarship that vanished the same week Washington Freight announced a budget cut. Her future had paid for their luxury retreat. Now she carried coffee cups instead of textbooks. But fate, it seemed, wasn't finished with her yet. The elevator in her building groaned like an old man with bad knees. It always stopped between the 3rd and 4th floors before jolting back into motion, as if deciding whether the effort was worth it. Audra didn't mind. It gave her a few extra seconds to breathe, to drop the corporate facade she had to wear at work and let the delivery girl in yellow be human again. When the doors finally opened on the 6th floor, the familiar scent of fried onions and bleach welcomed her home. Apartment 6B's hallway light flickered like a nervous heartbeat. The rent-controlled building was old enough to have character, her grandmother always said. But character didn't pay for repairs. Audra pushed the door open quietly. Meme. The only answer was the rhythmic beeping of the monitor beside the worn recliner. Her grandmother, Esme, lay asleep under a faded blue quilt, one hand resting on a Bible, the other on her chest. The oxygen tube looped across her cheeks like fragile glass wire. Audra set down her delivery bag, careful not to wake her, then tiptoed to the kitchenette. She pulled out a bottle of heart medication from the cabinet, checking the label. Only 3 pills left. Payday wasn't until Friday. Her throat tightened. She whispered, "Encore 3 jours meme. Just 3 more days." The hum of the fridge filled the silence. On the counter sat a half-finished poem in her grandmother's slanted handwriting. Quand les ailes brûlant, elle aime apprendre à marcher. When wings burn, the soul learns to walk. Audra touched the paper lightly. You always knew what to say. She slipped out of her yellow uniform and into an oversized hoodie before sitting by the window. The city outside was a flickering mosaic of neon lights and exhaust smoke. Somewhere below, a car alarm wailed, then fell silent again. Audra pulled out her notebook, the same one she'd carried since high school. Its pages were filled with translations, poems, and bits of overheard conversation from her delivery routes. Words were her escape hatch, her rebellion. She wrote, "Je livre de repos, mais ce sont les rêves que je transporte." I deliver meals, but it's dreams I carry. Her pen slowed as her thoughts drifted back, to the day she lost everything. It had been a Thursday, bright and cruelly beautiful. She was 17, wearing her best thrift store blazer and carrying a folder labeled Academy Acceptance. Her grandmother had hugged her so tightly that morning, whispering, "Ma petite étoile, tu vas briller." My little star, you will shine. The International Language Academy had always been her dream, a bridge between the world she loved. Spanish from her father's side, French from her grandmother, and English, the language of ambition. She'd earned a full scholarship, tuition, books, even living expenses, funded by a corporate endowment from none other than Washington Freight's Future Voices initiative. Except that morning, the email arrived. "We regret to inform you that due to unforeseen financial restructuring, your scholarship has been revoked. We wish you success in your future endeavors." She had read it 3 times, each word a blade. By the time she reached the Academy's office, the administrators could only offer apologies and polite helplessness. Corporate reallocation, they said. A temporary suspension of educational partnerships. That same week, Granville, Washington posted a photo on social media, smiling beside a row of executives on a yacht, champagne glasses raised under the caption, "Celebrating New Horizons." Audra had stared at that image until the screen blurred. A soft cough brought her back to the present. Esme was awake now, her eyes warm but tired. "You're late, ma chérie. I got held up at work." Audra forced a smile, crossing to her side. "But I brought you soup." Her grandmother's smile was faint. "Always taking care of me. That's what family does." Esme studied her granddaughter's face, the exhaustion she tried to hide. "You've been writing again, haven't you?" "Just little things," Audra admitted. "Nothing that matters." "Words always matter." Esme's voice softened. "They are the only inheritance no one can take." Audra sat at her feet, resting her head against her grandmother's knee. "Do you ever wish I'd chosen something easier? Something practical?" Esme chuckled, a dry, tender sound. "You mean something that doesn't scare rich men?" Audra laughed quietly. Her grandmother's gaze grew distant. "When I came to this country, I thought speaking many tongues would make me welcome. Instead, people asked why my English was so good. You, my darling, have the same gift, but also the same burden. The world fears those who understand too much." Audra didn't answer. She thought of the CEO's face that morning, the disbelief, the pride crumbling behind his polished composure. Hours later, when Esme drifted back to sleep, Audra prepared for her night shift. She worked at a downtown office complex after hours, cleaning glass panels and vacuuming hallways that smelled faintly of expensive cologne and overconfidence. It wasn't glamorous, but it covered what her delivery job didn't. The bus ride there took 40 minutes. She used the time to practice her languages under her breath. Phrases in French, idioms in Spanish, pronunciation drills in English. Her seatmates sometimes gave her strange looks. She didn't care. Once her father had told her, every language is a new pair of eyes. Now she used them all to survive. By midnight, her back ached, her hands raw from bleach, but her mind refused to rest. She thought about that moment in the boardroom. The way the executive's laughter had died the second she spoke. The shock, the silence, the sudden unbearable awareness that they had underestimated her. Part of her wanted to forget it ever happened. Another part, a sharper, bolder part, couldn't stop replaying it. Would they talk about her tomorrow? Would they pretend it hadn't happened? Or worse, would they try to find her? At 2 a.m., her shift ended. The night air was cold enough to sting. She tucked her hands into her sleeves and started the long walk home. The city glowed with restless energy. Taxis slicing through puddles, neon signs humming over shuttered stores. She passed a bakery that threw out its leftovers at closing. The baker, a kind older man, waved when he saw her. Bonsoir, Audra. Croissants again. Merci, monsieur, she said with a tired smile, accepting the small bag. It would be breakfast for both of them. Back home, Esme was still asleep. The monitor beeped steadily. The only proof her fragile heart was still fighting. Audra warmed her hands around a mug of leftover coffee and opened her notebook again. She began to write in French, a poem she didn't plan to finish. Il Lyonnaise, mais leurs rires tremblant. Il m'en vu petite, mais leurs yeux m'en effoué. Il sont dit fille en jaune, sans savoir que la lumière vient du soleil. They laughed at me, but their laughter shook. They saw me small, but their eyes turned away. They called me girl in yellow, not knowing that light comes from the sun. The words steadied her. They made her feel less like a ghost in her own life. Just after dawn, her phone buzzed. At first, she thought it was another delivery notification or a bill reminder. But when she checked the screen, her breath caught. A message. No number, no contact name. Just 6 words. Mr. Washington wants to see you. Her first instinct was disbelief. Her second was fear. She read it again and again, as if repetition might change the meaning. Was this a joke? A trap? Or something else entirely? She looked over at her sleeping grandmother, the soft rise and fall of her chest, the fragile thread that kept their world intact. Audra closed her notebook, her heart drumming a quiet rhythm of defiance and dread. Maybe fate wasn't finished with her yet. But fate, she knew, could be cruel company. Still, she whispered to the morning light, "All right, Mr. Washington. Let's see what you want." And somewhere deep inside, behind the fear and exhaustion, a spark ignited, small but steady. The girl in yellow was no longer invisible. The elevator hummed softly as Audra rode to the 42nd floor. The executive floor, a place delivery girls rarely saw unless they were dropping off trays of artisanal coffee or catered sushi. The light reflected off the polished chrome walls, stretching her reflection into a fragile, shifting ghost. Her yellow jacket, the same one she wore for every shift, stood out like sunlight in a storm of suits. She gripped the parcel in her hand tighter than necessary. Her phone still displayed the text that had derailed her evening. "Mr. Washington wants to see you." The message had come from an unlisted number, the kind that could send chills down a person's spine if they worked at the bottom rung of a corporate ladder. When the elevator doors opened, the air changed. Cooler, quieter, richer. She stepped into a world built to intimidate. Leather chairs, glass partitions, marble floors. People didn't rush here. They glided. Audra approached the mahogany desk of Mrs. Shaw, Washington Freight's head of legal. a woman with iron-gray hair and an expression carved from discipline. Mrs. Shaw looked up briefly from her tablet. "You must be Audra Rodriguez," she said in a tone that made the simple act of confirming identity sound like an interrogation. "Mr. Washington is expecting you. Straight ahead. Try not to keep him waiting." The phrasing, "try not to," told Audra that waiting was a privilege reserved for people with stock options, not delivery girls in thrifted sneakers. She inhaled slowly, squared her shoulders, and knocked once on the frosted glass door. "Enter," came a voice. Deep, smooth, confident. Granville Washington stood at the window overlooking the skyline. His reflection caught between glass and shadow. The city pulsed beneath him, a constellation of ambition and exhaustion. He turned as she entered, a faint smirk already playing on his lips. Ah, the delivery girl who apparently knows her tenses. Audra's heart thudded, but she managed a quiet "sir." He gestured toward the seat opposite his desk, not as an invitation, but a test of how comfortable she dared to be. She chose to stand. Granville slid a document across the desk. "Let's see if lightning strikes twice." The folder was stamped confidential. Merger draft. Franco-Atlantic Division. The text shimmered faintly under the desk light, dense with legalese and fine print, all in French. "Read it," he said. "Translate paragraph 3. Audra's throat tightened. His tone was laced with irony, like a man replaying a joke only he understood. She could tell he didn't expect her to understand the document, only to stumble to amuse him. But when her eyes met the text, her pulse slowed. French flowed through her like a river finding its course again. She began softly. "La filiale sera transférée sous un compte tiers appartenant à la Société Amber GW Holdings." Then she stopped. Her voice faltered. The line she'd just translated, "The subsidiary shall be transferred under a third-party account belonging to the shell company GW Holdings," made her stomach twist. GW. Granville, Washington. This wasn't a test. This was a merger built to bleed the company dry, funneling ownership quietly into his personal offshore entity. Granville tilted his head. "You were doing well. Why stop?" Her silence stretched. He moved closer, the faint scent of expensive cologne and power filling the air between them. "You're not scared of a few big words, are you?" "I'm just trying to understand the context, sir." "Oh, I'm sure context isn't part of your job description," he said with a chuckle. "Your job is to deliver, not to think." The words struck sharper than intended. Audra felt her cheeks flush, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "Then maybe you shouldn't call it a test." The room went very still. Granville raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." Audra exhaled slowly. "If it's a game, sir, then it's not really a test. But if it is a test," she gestured at the paper, "then I'd say it's one designed to see how much you can hide in plain sight." A flicker of amusement, or warning, crossed his face. "You think you've uncovered something?" She hesitated. "I think. This isn't what it appears to be." Granville smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He leaned against his desk, crossing his arms. "You know what I like about you, Audra? You don't know when to be quiet. Most people in your position would have thanked me for the opportunity and left." "Most people don't speak French," she replied softly. That earned her a low, dangerous laugh. "Careful. Confidence can look a lot like insolence from where you stand." For a moment their eyes locked, his cold with control, hers steady with quiet defiance. Outside the half-open door, Mrs. Shaw had paused on her way back from the copier. The conversation filtering through the narrow crack made her freeze. She didn't move, just listened. Granville tapped his pen against the table. "Tell me something, Miss Rodriguez. What do you want?" "Money." A permanent position. Tuition. I could make that happen. Audra's pulse spiked. She wanted to laugh or cry or both. He thought her silence was greed, not moral paralysis. I just want fairness, she said. Fairness, he echoed as though tasting the word for the first time. There's no fairness in business. There's only leverage. And lies? She asked before she could stop herself. He smiled again, but this time it was colder. You're clever. But clever people burn out faster when they think they can rewrite the rules. Audra forced her breathing steady. Maybe it's not about rewriting them, sir. Maybe it's about reading what others pretend not to. Mrs. Shaw's fingers tightened around her clipboard. She didn't yet know the full context, but she'd heard enough to recognize danger, both for Audra and for the company. Inside, Granville snapped the folder shut. That'll be all. Audra didn't move. Is there a problem, Miss Rodriguez? Her voice was calm, but inside her hands trembled. You asked me to translate, sir. Should I finish? He gave her a long, unreadable look. No. You've translated enough. She turned to leave. As she reached the door, his voice stopped her. Whatever you think you saw, he said softly. You didn't. She faced him. Then maybe you should be more careful about what you put in writing. The door clicked shut behind her, and Mrs. Shaw barely had time to step away before Audra emerged, her expression unreadable. Everything all right? Mrs. Shaw asked carefully. Audra nodded. Yes, ma'am. Perfectly. But as she walked toward the elevator, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't check it yet. Her mind was still replaying every word, every clause, every trace of corruption buried in corporate French. In the elevator, she finally pulled out her phone. The screen reflected her tense face as she swiped open the camera app, pretending to check her messages. Then, with a trembling thumb, she held the folder just far enough from her chest and clicked. A single photo of the merger document. Paragraph 3 clearly visible. The elevator doors opened on the ground floor. Her reflection stared back at her. The girl in yellow, looking far too calm for someone who had just crossed an invisible line. Outside, the evening wind tugged at her jacket as she stepped into the dying light. The city hummed, unaware that inside a single photograph now lived enough proof to shatter an empire. But for now she had to keep walking, steady, invisible, unassuming. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, soft and unwavering. Courage doesn't roar, ma chérie. It whispers and keeps walking. Audra exhaled, pocketed her phone, and disappeared into the crowd, a delivery girl carrying secrets powerful enough to unmake kings. The next morning, rain slicked the streets like glass. Audra's sneakers soaked through within minutes, but she didn't slow down. The city felt different now. Every billboard, every reflection of the Washington Freight logo in passing windows seemed to be watching her. She stopped under a leaky awning, clutching her delivery bag like a shield. Inside, her phone buzzed again and again with dispatch alerts, deliveries waiting, but she ignored them all. Her mind was trapped in paragraph 3 of that French contract. La filiale sera transférée sous un compte tiers appartenant à la Société Amber GW Holdings. She could still hear Granville's voice, smooth and cruel. Whatever you think you saw, you didn't. But she had seen. She had translated it. And once you understood corruption in another language, it became impossible to unsee. At noon, she slipped into the hospital cafeteria, her second home. The smell of disinfectant and burnt coffee blended into something that almost felt safe. Girl, you look like you've seen a ghost, said Rosa, a nurse and Audra's oldest friend. She sat across from her, unwrapping a protein bar and eyeing her face. Audra tried to smile. Just a long day. Long day, short pay, the delivery life, Rosa muttered. You working for that freight company again? Yeah. Washington Freight. Rosa frowned. That's the one that cut your scholarship, right? The words hit harder than expected. Audra nodded. Rosa leaned closer. You got that look again, the same one you had the night you got that letter from the academy. What happened? Audra hesitated. The last thing she wanted was to drag Rosa into danger, but she needed someone to say it out loud to make sure she wasn't losing her mind. There's something wrong with one of their contracts, she said quietly. Something illegal. Rosa blinked. Illegal how? In French, Audra said, her voice cracking. And I understood it. She explained everything, the second test, the hidden clause, Granville's name in the shell company. Rosa listened, eyes widening with every sentence. Girl, that's corporate fraud, she whispered. If what you're saying is true, that's serious. I know. But I don't have proof. Rosa sighed, rubbing her temples. So what are you gonna do? Audra looked down at her coffee. Find it. That night, she took the bus to the public library on East 14th, one of the few places open late and free. The security guard recognized her from her night delivery routes and waved her in. She claimed her usual corner, a dim table under a flickering light, her phone beside her, the photograph of the document pulled up on the screen. The French text glowed against the darkness. GW Holdings. Transfert partial deactifs. Geneva. She began searching. One website led to another. Corporate registries, offshore databases, translated filings. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, switching between English, French, and Spanish. It felt like slipping back into her old self, the scholarship student who once dreamed of working for the UN, not delivering takeout to the people who stole her future. Hours passed. The rain stopped. Her notebook filled with names, numbers, and arrows linking shell companies like a web of deceit. Finally, she found it, a document in the Swiss Business Archive. Société. GW Holdings SA Administrateur. Graham W. Henley. Address, Rue de Beaumont, Genève. Graham W. Henley, she murmured aloud, staring at the screen. The initials matched. GW. Granville, Washington had registered his own fake company under a false name. Her pulse quickened as she took photos of every screen, every record. The more she uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Washington Freight's merger was nothing but a funnel, a quiet siphon of millions into a private account overseas. For a moment she sat back, dizzy from the discovery. Then her phone vibrated. A message. Unknown number. You're digging where you shouldn't, Miss Rodriguez. Her blood ran cold. She looked around the silent library, half expecting someone to step out from the shadows. But there was only the hum of old computers and the distant shuffle of a janitor's mop. She packed her things quickly and headed for the door, heart pounding. The following evening, a black car pulled up outside her apartment complex. Too sleek, too out of place. Her grandmother's light was still on upstairs. Audra froze halfway up the stairs. The back door opened and Mrs. Shaw stepped out, an umbrella in hand. Audra's breath caught. Mrs. Shaw. The woman didn't smile. You're difficult to find after hours. I don't understand. How did you? Mrs. Shaw cut her off with a raised hand. Mr. Washington doesn't know I'm here. That made Audra's pulse spike. Mrs. Shaw looked up toward the apartment window. Your grandmother still lives here, doesn't she? Yes, ma'am. She reminds me of mine, the older woman said softly. Strong, proud, and too trusting. Rain began to fall again, tapping softly against the umbrella. Listen carefully, Audra, Mrs. Shaw continued. Whatever you found, let it go. People who challenge men like Granville, Washington don't just lose their jobs. They lose everything. So you know, Audra whispered. Mrs. Shaw's jaw tightened. Knowing and proving are different things. He's protected. Legally. Politically. Financially. Audra swallowed hard. And morally. Mrs. Shaw's eyes flickered, just once, with something like regret. Morals don't win lawsuits. She turned to leave, but paused. Be careful who you expose, she said quietly. Not everyone who looks righteous wants justice. Then she was gone, the car melting back into the rain. By midnight, Audra sat beside her grandmother's bed, holding her frail hand. Esme's breathing was shallow, the oxygen machine hissing softly. The nurse had left a new bill on the nightstand. The total made Audra's stomach twist. Her grandmother stirred. You're still awake, ma chérie? Couldn't sleep, Audra whispered. Esme smiled faintly. Then read to me. Something beautiful. Audra hesitated, then pulled a folded scrap of paper from her jacket pocket. One of her own poems. One she'd written years ago in French, when the world still felt open. Dans le silence, j'apprends à écouter les battements du monde. De Jaime Sauvins, même les cendres peuvent rêver. In silence, I learn to hear the heartbeat of the world, and I remember even ashes can dream. Her grandmother's eyes shimmered. You always had a gift, Audra. Maybe gifts are just burdens that sing, she whispered. Esme chuckled weakly. Then sing louder, child. But hours later, the sound of her grandmother's soft breathing faltered. The machine beeped. The nurse rushed in. Time became a blur of shouts, calls, and panic. By dawn, Esme lay still. Audra sat beside her, clutching the still warm hand that had once braided her hair, taught her languages, and told her that truth mattered even when no one listened. And suddenly, all the fear she'd felt about losing her job, her safety, her anonymity, cracked open and became something sharper. Resolve. The next morning, her eyes were swollen but steady. She sat at her small kitchen table, laptop open, the photograph of the French contract glowing faintly. Granville's voice echoed again. Whatever you think you saw, you didn't. She opened her translation document, fingers trembling but determined. Line by line, she translated the entire merger proposal, exposing every hidden clause, every deceitful term. It wasn't just a translation anymore. It was testimony. When she was done, she stared at the blinking cursor, the last empty line daring her to stop. Instead, she clicked Compose. To partenaires at valtech-fr.com subject. Truth from the translation room. In fluent French, she wrote, Messrs. J'ai-vous écrit non pas un employé, mais un témoin. La traduction joint reveal on manipulation dissimulé par M. Washington. Verifies les comptes liés à GW Holdings. Genève. Les mots n'y mentent pas, seulement les hommes que les signent. Cordialement, AR. She attached the file. Her finger hovered over send. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the horizon. The sound of something bigger than weather. Audra closed her eyes and pressed send. The email whooshed away, disappearing into the cloud, carrying with it the truth that could either free her or destroy everything. She sat back, staring at the screen, her breath coming shallow but steady. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. For the first time, she wasn't running. She was fighting back, with paper, proof, and a name no one would ever forget. The morning sky was the color of steel. Clouds rolled over the skyline like smoke, heavy and bruised with rain, but inside Washington Freight's tower, everything gleamed. Glass, chrome, and confidence. The top floor was being transformed for what everyone called the day that would change the company forever. The merger with Valtech France was set to finalize at noon. News crews waited outside. The board was assembled. Caterers tiptoed around with trays of champagne. ensuring every surface reflected success. And somewhere beneath all that shine, Audra Rodriguez waited in the freight elevator, clutching a tray of coffee cups and a clipboard with delivery slips that weren't hers. She hadn't been scheduled to deliver anything that morning. In fact, she'd intended to stay far away from Washington Freight after sending that email to Valtech. But at dawn, she'd received another unexpected text, this time from Mrs. Shaw. Delivery sub needed for 11 a.m. top floor. Bring coffee. Be quiet. Watch. The message had no explanation, no signature, and yet something in the phrasing, that clipped, guarded rhythm, told Audra it was deliberate. Now, as the elevator doors opened, she stepped into the storm she didn't yet understand. The boardroom was all glass and sunlight. Panoramic windows overlooking a restless city, a mahogany table stretching like a runway between two worlds, the Washington Freight Board and the French delegation from Valtech. At the head sat Granville Washington, immaculate in a gray suit, his watch glinting like a crown. He looked every bit the man who believed he owned the room, and perhaps the world. To his left sat Mrs. Shaw, calm and inscrutable as ever, her files neatly stacked, her eyes unreadable. Across the table, 3 French executives whispered among themselves. The one in the middle, a silver-haired man with sharp eyes and a quiet authority, was Jean Mercier, Valtech's chief negotiator. Audra slipped in quietly, keeping to the wall. She set the coffee tray down beside the door, avoiding attention, but Mrs. Shaw's eyes flickered to her once, deliberate, acknowledging. Granville began speaking, his tone smooth, practiced, rehearsed. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank our friends from Valtech for joining us. Today marks the beginning of a powerful transatlantic partnership, one that will redefine logistics in both hemispheres. Applause murmured through the room. Jean Mercier nodded politely, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. Indeed, Mr. Washington. We too value transparency and integrity in all partnerships. Something about the way he said integrity made Audra's heart jolt. For the first half hour, the meeting unfolded like clockwork. Slides projected figures of growth, charts, timelines, press coverage. Granville was in his element. Charming, commanding, his arrogance lacquered in charisma. But as the discussion turned to the final signing, Mercier leaned forward, tapping the printed contract in front of him. Before we proceed, he said, there is one matter I'd like clarified. Granville's expression didn't waver. Of course. Mercier's accent made every word sound like a quiet warning. Who, may I ask, handled the translation of this document? It is remarkably precise. Granville smiled, flashing his teeth. That would be me personally. I ensured it reflected our company's standards and values. Mercier interrupted softly. A ripple of unease passed through the board. Mercier turned a page, sliding his glasses down. Then perhaps you can explain why Clause 9 reads differently in the French copy than in the English original. The room froze. Granville blinked. I'm sorry. Mercier's voice remained calm. Clause 9, regarding the transfer of subsidiary assets. In English, it refers to joint control. In French, he lifted the page. It specifies exclusive transfer to a third-party account. GW Holdings, Geneva. A stunned silence fell. Every eye in the room turned to Granville. His smile faltered. That's impossible, he said, his voice tightening. There must be a misunderstanding. Mrs. Shaw spoke for the first time. I reviewed the summary translation, not the original file. The French version was uploaded from your office, Mr. Washington. Audra's pulse pounded. She could almost feel the electricity in the air, like the seconds before lightning strikes. Granville forced a laugh. I'm sure this is a minor formatting error. We'll have legal correct it immediately. But Mercier's expression didn't change. He leaned back slowly. "Mr. Washington, we received an email last week, anonymously, from someone who attached a full translation of the French contract. One that exposes these discrepancies." The words dropped like stones. Granville's knuckles whitened on the table edge. "What email?" Mercier's gaze swept across the room, finally landing on Audra. "The sender's initials were AR, tell me. Does that name mean anything to you?" Audra's breath caught. Granville followed Mercier's gaze, and froze. In that instant, recognition flashed across his face. His jaw tightened. "You." Audra's hands trembled, but she lifted her chin. "Yes, sir." The silence that followed was total, the kind that made time stretch. "You sent that email?" Granville's voice was a knife. "Yes," Audra said, steady now. "I translated it." Mrs. Shaw closed her eyes briefly, as if bracing for an explosion. Mercier smiled faintly. "Then, mademoiselle, you are the one we should thank. Your translation was exact, and your honesty refreshing." Granville rose so fast his chair scraped the floor. "This is absurd. She's a delivery girl. She doesn't even belong in this room." "Neither do fraudulent contracts," Mercier replied coolly. Murmurs rippled through the board members. Someone whispered, "Did he just say fraudulent?" Mrs. Shaw finally stood, calm but commanding. "Let's all take a breath. Mr. Washington, before you respond further, we need to verify which version was submitted to Valteca's legal department." Granville turned on her, his voice low and venomous. "You're taking her word over mine?" Mrs. Shaw met his glare without blinking. "I'm taking evidence over ego." Audra's heart thundered. She hadn't meant for it to unravel like this. Not here, not now, but the truth was no longer hers to hide. Granville pointed a trembling hand at her. "You think you can humiliate me in front of international partners? You think one little stunt erases the fact that you stole a confidential document?" "I didn't steal it," Audra said quietly. "I saved it." Laughter, sharp and humorless, burst from him. "You saved nothing. You've doomed yourself. You're fired. Effective immediately." Mrs. Shaw's voice cut clean through the chaos. "Not before we verify the documents." That silenced the room. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Granville's face. Mercier folded his hands. "Mr. Washington, if I may, Valtech cannot proceed with a deal under such questionable circumstances. Until we confirm which contract is legitimate, all discussions are hereby suspended." The words echoed like thunder. Reporters downstairs caught the first signs of disruption. Raised voices, security summoned, whispers of scandal. Inside, the tension had broken into full chaos. Granville slammed his hand on the table. "You don't have the authority to." Mercier stood slowly. "Oh, but I do. Under French corporate law, a falsified translation constitutes grounds for criminal review. You see, we keep receipts too." Mrs. Shaw's team began collecting both versions of the documents, their expressions tight with disbelief. One legal assistant murmured, "The signatures don't match the metadata. The timestamps. They're falsified." Granville's mask began to crack. "You think you can ruin me over a clerical inconsistency?" Mrs. Shaw turned toward him, her voice quiet but cutting. "It's not clerical, sir. It's criminal." He glared at her. "You're supposed to be on my side." "I'm on the side of the law," she replied. Audra stood frozen near the door, hands trembling, every instinct screaming to run. But she didn't move. Granville turned toward her again. "You think you've won something? You have no idea who you're dealing with. I made this company what it is. I made you." Audra's voice shook, But she didn't back down. "You made me invisible, sir. I did the one thing you never saw coming. I paid attention." The board murmured again, stunned. Mercier lifted the contract. "This," he said, waving it gently, "isn't just a translation error. It's a confession. One written in your own company's letterhead." Granville's mouth opened, then closed again. His face flushed crimson. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "Maybe," Audra said softly. "But not as much as you will." Within minutes, the French delegation gathered their briefcases, standing as one. Mercier extended a final handshake, not to Granville but to Mrs. Shaw. "Until our audit concludes," he said, "I advise your board to suspend all international operations tied to this merger, and perhaps to reconsider who speaks for you." He glanced at Audra before leaving. "Courage, mademoiselle. You did what was right." When the glass doors shut behind them, the room collapsed into chaos. Board members talking over one another, assistants making frantic calls, security uncertain whom to escort out. Granville stood motionless, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "You," he said slowly, his voice low, shaking. "You think this ends here?" Mrs. Shaw gathered her folders, her expression unreadable. "It ends when the truth does." Then, turning to the nearest assistant, "Get IT to secure every digital record. Now." Audra stood in the middle of the storm she'd unleashed, rain beginning to hammer against the glass walls. The skyline outside blurred into streaks of gray and silver, as if the world itself were weeping with relief. By the time security escorted Granville from the boardroom, the room looked like the aftermath of a battle. Papers strewn, coffee spilled, whispers cutting through the air like debris. Audra sat alone in the corner, shaking from adrenaline. She couldn't believe what she'd done. What had happened? Mrs. Shaw approached quietly. "You were never supposed to be in that meeting," she said softly. Audra looked up, her voice raw. "You sent the text." A faint smile tugged at the corners of Mrs. Shaw's lips. "I needed someone with courage. Someone who still believed the truth had value. But my job is safe," Mrs. Shaw interrupted. "At least for now. But you should know, Mr. Washington won't go quietly. He'll fight. People like him always do." Audra stared at the rain-streaked window. "Then I'll be ready." Mrs. Shaw handed her a folded note. "Go home. Rest. And when they ask who translated the contract, don't hide any more." Audra unfolded the paper. On it, written in neat cursive, was a single line. "Courage doesn't roar." The same words her grandmother had once whispered. She looked up, but Mrs. Shaw was already walking away, her silhouette fading into the polished light of the hallway. Outside, thunder cracked over the city. Audra turned back to the window, her reflection staring back, calm and certain now. She wasn't just a delivery girl anymore. She was the storm they hadn't seen coming. And somewhere in Geneva, an offshore account under GW Holdings had just become the world's most dangerous secret. By evening, news broke that Valtech France had suspended the Washington Freight merger pending a full investigation. The stock plummeted overnight. Anonymous sources leaked whispers of fraud, altered contracts, and one unknown translator who'd changed everything. As the world speculated, Audra sat alone in her apartment, watching the city lights flicker through the rain. The storm outside mirrored the one she had unleashed. And this time she didn't run from it. She watched it burn. Audra didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window of their cramped apartment, the glow from the streetlight painting fractured gold across her grandmother's blanket. Esme was asleep, her thin frame rising and falling with effort. The soft hum of the oxygen machine filled the silence, steady but fragile, like the calm before a storm. On the small table beside her, a copy of Le Monde Économique lay open. The headline was stark, almost theatrical. Merger suspended. French partners demand review of Washington Freight's legal documents. Granville Washington's empire had always seemed unshakable, a machine too powerful to question. But one translation, one sentence in French, had cracked its polished armor. And now, everyone wanted to know who struck the blow. By dawn, Washington Freight's headquarters no longer smelled of victory. Security guards whispered by the elevators. The secretaries, once sharp-tongued and immaculately styled, now avoided eye contact. The boardroom, the cathedral of corporate power, was under lockdown for an internal audit. Granville Washington hadn't been seen since the French delegation left. Rumor said he'd smashed a glass decanter against the wall after Mrs. Shaw's quiet but cutting intervention. Another said he'd called the CFO at midnight screaming, "Find me the rat." Audra arrived for her shift through the back delivery entrance, wearing her yellow cap and faded jacket. Her ID badge still read temporary courier, though by now, the entire building buzzed with whispers about the girl who spoke French. When she passed by the reception, a young intern glanced up, recognition flickering across his face. "Is it true?" he whispered. "You're the one who—" Audra shook her head and walked on, keeping her gaze low. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a storm about to break. By noon, the audit team arrived. 4 sharp-eyed analysts from Deloitte, escorted by Mrs. Shaw herself. Files were boxed, laptops were seized, and the mood turned electric. Granville finally appeared at 1 p.m., his expression carved from stone. His tailored suit couldn't disguise the dark crescents under his eyes. He strode into the conference room, followed by his loyal deputy, Mr. Kent, who carried a stack of confidential binders like a nervous altar boy. Mrs. Shaw, calm as ever, stood at the head of the table. "Mr. Washington, the partners have requested full transparency on all international transactions over the last fiscal year. That includes the Geneva accounts." Granville's jaw flexed. "Those accounts are private subsidiaries. Irrelevant to the merger." "Not if they're listed as recipients of asset transfers," she replied, her voice smooth, surgical. Audra watched from the hallway, unnoticed, pretending to wipe down a cart. Her stomach tightened. Every phrase, every name she'd uncovered in her late-night research now echoed in real time. Les Sociétés Phantoms de Genève, the ghost companies that drained Washington Freight from the inside. It was happening. The truth was unraveling, and Granville could feel the threads slipping through his fingers. By afternoon, the building was chaos. Executives were called in for questioning. Accounts were frozen. Someone from finance leaked the story to the Financial Post, and by evening, the stock price had begun to tremble. On the 12th floor, where the delivery team rested between runs, Audra sat beside her coworker, Tina, a nurse who picked up night shifts for extra income. Tina handed her a can of warm soda and said, "You look like someone who just wrestled lightning." Audra gave a tired laugh. "Feels like it too." Tina's eyes softened. "They're saying Washington's finished. That your translation was the reason the French pulled out." "I didn't mean for it to blow up like this," Audra murmured. "I just wanted them to see what was hidden." Tina leaned closer. "Maybe they finally will. But don't think for a second they'll thank you for it." The next morning, a man in a gray suit followed her out of the building. He didn't speak, just watched as she crossed the street toward the hospital. His presence was deliberate, silent, unnerving. By the 3rd day, her locker at work had been broken into. Her poetry notebook was torn in half. Someone had scrawled across the inside door, "Stay quiet, delivery girl." Audra's hands shook as she read it. Fear coiled around her chest, but so did something else, a defiant anger that refused to bow. That night, as Esme dozed beside her, Audra whispered in French, "La peur est une langue que j'ai refusé d'apprendre." Fear is a language I refuse to learn. When she showed up at Mrs. Shaw's office the next day, the older woman was waiting. Calm, deliberate, sipping black coffee like the building wasn't crumbling around her. "Miss Rodriguez," Mrs. Shaw said softly, "you've made powerful enemies." "I didn't want to," Audra replied. "But someone had to translate the truth." Mrs. Shaw smiled faintly. "For the first time." "Good. Because we're not done yet. Don't forget to like the video and hit the subscribe button to get more thrilling stories." She handed Audra a flash drive. Inside are documents confirming Geneva's fake corporations, all tied to Washington's personal offshore entity. "But we need corroboration. Your translations, and the original French texts. They complete the chain." Audra hesitated. "If we do this, he'll come after us." "He already has," Shaw said. "Now it's about how we finish it." They spent hours together that night, in a small side office lit by the glow of computer screens. Audra typed line after line, translating corporate jargon into simple, undeniable truth. Each sentence was a match, each paragraph a spark. By dawn, their dossier was complete, a 47-page report that could dismantle an empire. When Audra returned home, her grandmother was awake, frail but smiling. She'd seen the news on TV, the scrolling headline beneath the morning anchor: "Washington Freight faces allegations of international fraud." "Is this your doing, Sherry?" Esme asked with a soft laugh. Audra sat on the edge of the bed. "Maybe just a small part." Esme took her hand. Her skin was paper-thin, her pulse faint but steady. "You were born with words meant to change things, not carry them," she whispered. "Don't let them silence you." Tears welled in Audra's eyes. "It's dangerous, Grandma. These people, they don't lose quietly." "Then make them lose loudly," Esme said. "Let the whole world hear it." Within days, the press descended. Journalists camped outside Washington Freight's headquarters. TV vans lined the street. Reporters demanded statements. Shareholders demanded resignations. Granville's face appeared on every screen, once the symbol of American ambition, now the cautionary tale of greed exposed. The Wall Street Journal called it the Washington Scandal. Inside, morale shattered. Employees whispered, deleted emails, printed resumes. The company cafeteria fell silent when Audra entered. Some looked at her with admiration, others with fear, a few with hatred. One executive muttered as she passed, "You think truth feeds anyone? You just cost hundreds their jobs." Audra stopped. "I didn't cost them anything. Your boss did." Her voice didn't shake. Mrs. Shaw's office became their bunker. Stacks of printed evidence lined the walls. Audra cross-referenced every clause, every French annotation, every shell transfer. Together, they prepared a dossier so airtight it could survive any courtroom. At midnight, Shaw looked up from the table. "You realize what this means. Once the board sees this, there's no going back." Audra nodded. "There shouldn't be." Outside, thunder rumbled over the city, a storm rolling in from the coast. On the night before the board hearing, Granville appeared unexpectedly in the hallway outside the translation office. His tailored coat gleamed under the fluorescent light. "Quite the performance, Miss Rodriguez," he said quietly. "You think the press loves you now? Wait until they call you a fraud, a thief, a jealous employee who doctored evidence." "I didn't doctor anything," Audra replied. He leaned in close, his cologne sharp and cold. "You crossed into a world you don't belong to, and I'll bury you there." Her pulse raced, but she didn't step back. "You can try." Granville's smile vanished. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Audra met his eyes. "Neither do you." He walked away, his footsteps echoing down the marble corridor, like a warning, like a promise. The next morning, the summons came. The notice was unsigned, but everyone knew who had called it. Washington Freight's fate, and Audra's, would be decided behind those glass doors. Mrs. Shaw handed her a neatly bound file. "Everything's ready. Remember, the truth speaks for itself, but only if you have the courage to say it out loud." Audra took the file. "Then let's make sure they hear every word." Outside, thunder broke. The storm had arrived. The air inside the boardroom felt heavier than marble. Every sound, the shuffle of papers, the hum of the overhead lights, the scratch of a pen, carried the weight of consequence. Rows of executives sat like statues, their faces taut, pale, drained of the arrogance that once filled the space. Cameras were forbidden, but everyone knew the world was watching from outside. Granville Washington entered last. His suit was immaculate, but his eyes betrayed the sleepless night behind him, the sharp glitter of a man cornered yet unwilling to concede. He carried no folder, no notes, only his ego, polished to a final gleam. At the far end of the table, the French delegation sat, 3 men and 1 woman, led by Jean Mercier, his calm expression unreadable. Beside him sat Mrs. Shaw, perfectly poised, a single stack of papers before her. And next to her, still in her yellow delivery uniform, was Audra Rodriguez. Granville's gaze flicked to her briefly, and for the faintest moment, his smile twitched. "Ah, the linguist who started the circus," he said lightly, taking his seat. "I do hope you brought more than coffee this time." Audra didn't answer. Her fingers brushed the edge of her file, the one she and Mrs. Shaw had built over weeks of quiet truth. She could feel her grandmother's words in her chest like armor. "You were born with words meant to change things." The chairman of the board, an elderly man named Drayton Holt, cleared his throat. "We're here to determine the veracity of the claims regarding international misrepresentation and the Geneva transfers. Both sides may present their statements." Granville was first. He rose with a grace born of habit, buttoned his jacket, and gave a measured smile to the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, this company has thrived for 20 years under my leadership. I've built trust across borders, created thousands of jobs. And now, a clerical misunderstanding, translated poorly, threatens to destroy all that." He gestured toward Audra without looking at her. A delivery worker with a questionable background has mistaken nuance for deceit. I trust we won't condemn a man's career over misplaced modifiers. Soft chuckles rippled from his loyalists. Even Holt hesitated. Then Audra stood. Slowly, quietly, like someone stepping into water that could drown or baptize her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every word carried clarity, precision, control. "Misplaced modifiers. Mr. Washington," she said, "I'm afraid your French is as careless as your ethics." Gasps. Granville's jaw tightened. Audra opened her file. The sound of the clasp snapping echoed like a gunshot. "Clause 9, she began. "Article 9. Le transfert d'actifs sera execute via compte prive, Genève. You authorized this phrasing, correct?" Granville folded his arms. Standard phrasing for asset relocation. She looked directly at Jean Mercier. "No, sir. In legal French, compte prive doesn't mean private account. It refers to a personal or untraceable financial entity. It's a loophole term, one used in high-risk transfers to conceal individual gain. The contract doesn't transfer company assets for partnership expansion. It diverts them into Mr. Washington's privately registered shell company, Société G.W. Logistics, Geneva." Silence fell like dust. Mrs. Shaw stood next, sliding a folder forward. "Confirmed through the Swiss Business Registry. Cross-referenced with the merger's timestamp and financial routing. Audra's translation is accurate and legally damning." Granville's voice snapped through the air. "You're misinterpreting intent. Those were temporary holding accounts approved by finance." Audra turned another page. "Then perhaps you can explain why those accounts received wire transfers dated 3 days before the board's approval, all in round figures matching the French merger sum." She slid photographs of the receipts across the table. Every executive leaned forward. Granville's confident mask began to fracture. Mercier, who had been silent until now, adjusted his glasses and spoke for the first time. "Mr. Washington," he said in crisp English, his accent deliberate, "we value our partners, but integrity is not negotiable. You have attempted to divert corporate funds under the guise of linguistic oversight." He turned to Audra, nodding slightly. "And this young woman has provided not just translation but truth." Audra felt the world tilt slightly, as if every humiliation, every ignored resume, every late-night delivery had led to this moment. Granville tried to recover, his tone sharp, desperate. "You think you can take her word over mine? She's nothing. A girl in a uniform pretending to understand business law." Mrs. Shaw's eyes hardened. "Then I suppose, Mr. Washington, you'll have no objection to the auditors confirming every one of her findings. I've already sent the dossier to the SEC." Gasps again, louder, heavier. Granville froze. His mouth opened, then closed. Around him, his allies withdrew in silence, afraid to share the blast radius. Jean Mercier stood. "Washington Freight has breached both legal and ethical contracts. Effective immediately, our partnership is suspended pending full investigation. We will no longer proceed under your leadership." The boardroom dissolved into chaos. Whispers, phones vibrating, the dull roar of downfall. Granville's face went scarlet. He slammed his fist against the table, the sound echoing through the glass walls like thunder. "This isn't over," he roared. "You'll regret this, every one of you, especially her." He pointed at Audra, eyes blazing with hatred and disbelief. But Audra didn't flinch. She simply looked at him, calm, steady. "Maybe. But not as much as you'll regret underestimating me." Granville's chair screeched as he shoved it back. He stormed out, his footsteps a furious drumbeat receding down the corridor. The board remained frozen, caught between shock and shame. Mrs. Shaw gathered the papers, her composure unshaken. Mercier offered Audra a hand. "Courage," he said softly. "You've done what most would not dare." For a long moment, Audra stood there in her yellow uniform, the girl who had delivered packages, not power, surrounded by those who once looked through her. And in that silence, beneath the cold hum of fluorescent light, Audra realized something profound. The truth had always been her language. She'd just finally found her audience. The meeting adjourned. The company trembled. And somewhere down the hall, Granville Washington's empire began to collapse, one exposed word at a time. The news broke on a gray Thursday morning. By noon, it was everywhere. Washington Freight CEO resigns amid fraud scandal. French delegation confirms internal manipulation. Whistleblower identified as former delivery worker. Granville Washington's empire, built on arrogance and deception, had collapsed overnight. Cameras swarmed the company gates, microphones hunted board members, and shareholders demanded accountability. But inside Audra's tiny apartment, the headlines didn't sound like victory. They sounded like consequence. Her phone buzzed non-stop, reporters, former co-workers, even strangers who wanted a quote from the delivery girl who outsmarted the CEO. She ignored them all. Fame wasn't food. Integrity didn't pay hospital bills. 2 days after the hearing, her supervisor from the courier company called. His voice was low, apologetic, almost embarrassed. "Audra, I'm really sorry, but corporates ended your contract. They said, "Something about exposure risk. You're a liability now." A liability. That's what honesty had bought her. She sat on the edge of her bed, the phone still in her hand, the world suddenly hollow. Esme slept fitfully nearby, her breath shallow, the faint hiss of the oxygen machine marking time. The same machine they might not be able to afford next month. Audra glanced at the hospital bills piled on the table. Numbers that looked like sentences, not invoices. The total due was circled in red ink, $11,820. Her tips and savings barely covered food and rent. The more the world talked about her courage, the deeper her silence grew. That night she walked the empty streets of their neighborhood. Cracked sidewalks, flickering streetlights, the faint hum of distant traffic. She'd given the truth to the world, but the world had given nothing back. When she returned home, a figure stood outside her door, elegant, composed, holding a leather folder. "Mrs. Shaw." Audra froze, surprised. "Mrs. Shaw." The older woman smiled faintly. "You look tired." "I suppose truth doesn't pay overtime," Audra said softly. Mrs. Shaw stepped closer, her heels clicking against the worn linoleum. "You did what I couldn't. What many of us were too afraid to do. I came to say thank you." Audra frowned. "Thank me? I lost my job. My grandmother's medicine runs out in 3 days. The rent." Mrs. Shaw raised a hand, gentle but firm. "And yet you've changed the entire narrative of that company." She opened the folder, revealing a sealed envelope embossed with a foreign crest. "This arrived at headquarters this morning. It's from the French embassy." Audra blinked. "The embassy." "They want to meet you," Mrs. Shaw said simply. "Jean Mercier sent the letter personally." Audra hesitated. "Why would they want to see me?" Mrs. Shaw's eyes softened. "Because you turned language into justice." The next afternoon, Audra stood in front of the French consulate, a white building with blue flags fluttering like whispers of another life. Her borrowed blazer felt too tight, her shoes pinched, her palms damp with nerves. Inside, the marble floors gleamed. The receptionist smiled kindly. "Mademoiselle Rodriguez? Monsieur Mercier will see you now." The door to the meeting room opened, and there he was, Jean Mercier, the same calm presence from the hearing, now smiling warmly as he extended his hand. "Mademoiselle Rodriguez," he said, his accent curling softly around the syllables. "Or perhaps, Audra, oui." She managed a small smile. "Oui, monsieur." He gestured for her to sit. "I wanted to thank you personally. You saved us from a grave deception, one that could have ruined both our companies. But more than that, you reminded us that truth, even from unexpected mouths, still matters." Audra blushed slightly. "I only did what was right." "Exactly." He slid a paper across the table. "Which is why we'd like to offer you this." She read the first line, and froze. "Scholarship offer. Master's program in Linguistic Mediation and Ethics. Université de Paris-Sorbonne. Full tuition. Living stipend. Travel allowance." Her breath caught. This can't be real." "It's very real," Mercier said kindly. "The program partners with our firm to train translators in international ethics and contract law. You have the talent, Mademoiselle Rodriguez. And now you'll have the opportunity." Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. I don't know what to say." Mercier stood and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Say yes. Make your grandmother proud. And when the world doubts you again, remind them of this day." That evening, the city glowed outside her apartment window. Audra sat beside Esme's bed, holding her frail hand, the scholarship letter spread across her lap. "Paris, ma chérie." Esme whispered weakly, her voice a thread of breath. You'll go. Audra smiled through tears. If you'll let me. Esme's eyes glimmered, soft and full of pride. Your grandfather. He used to dream of France. He said it was a place where words could change the world. Audra leaned closer. Then I'll go there for both of you. Her grandmother's hand trembled slightly. Promise me one thing. Anything. When they ask who taught you courage, Esme murmured, tell them it was love. Audra nodded, tears spilling freely now. Je promets, Mamie. I promise. They sat together in silence, the rhythm of the oxygen machine steady and fragile. Outside, a light rain began to fall, the soft percussion of renewal against the glass. Audra whispered a French poem, one of Esme's favorites. Her voice trembled but didn't break. Les mots sont ailes, Mamie. Ils portent l'âme quand le corps fatigue. Words are wings. Grandma. They carry the soul when the body grows tired. Esme smiled faintly. Beautiful, she whispered. Just like you. That night, Audra fell asleep in the chair beside her, hand still holding her grandmother's. When morning came, the first rays of sunlight slipped across the bedspread. Soft, golden, forgiving. The oxygen machine was silent. Esme's lips were curved in a peaceful smile, her hand still warm in Audra's grasp. And for the first time in years, Audra felt something that wasn't grief or exhaustion. It was purpose. Quiet, radiant purpose. The truth had cost her everything, but it had also given her the wings her grandmother always believed she had. Morning light spilled across the courtyard of the Sorbonne, soft and golden, like the first note of a song. The air smelled faintly of coffee and rain. Paris in spring, alive with possibility. Audra sat on a stone bench near the fountain, the hum of conversation swirling around her. Students with books under their arms, bicycles rattling past, the distant chime of a clock tower. She turned a glossy booklet over in her hands, its cover smooth and new. Language is Justice. The Power of Translation in Ethical Mediation by Audra Esme Rodriguez. Her name. On a cover. In print. She traced the letters with her fingertip, her heart swelling with a quiet disbelief. Months ago, she'd been delivering packages through corporate corridors, invisible in her yellow uniform. Now she was part of a world she'd once only glimpsed through borrowed books and whispered dreams. From somewhere deep inside her memory came a sound. Granville's laughter echoing off the marble walls of his office. Translate that, delivery girl. She remembered the sting, the humiliation, the quiet decision that had followed. I will not be small. That moment, that laugh had become the hinge of her story. Jean Mercier's voice drew her back to the present. You seem far away again, Audra. She smiled, closing the booklet. Just remembering how far I came. Mercier chuckled. Memory is good. It reminds us why we do the work. He gestured toward the tall windows of the language faculty, where sunlight caught the dust motes like drifting stars. You've built quite the reputation here. The conference organizers in Geneva specifically requested you. Audra blinked. They did. He nodded, eyes twinkling. Your research on ethical clauses in multilingual contracts, it's creating ripples, ma chère. You're not just translating anymore. You're redefining how the world listens. Her throat tightened. It still feels surreal. Mercier smiled. Good. It should. Truth always feels strange at first. Later that afternoon, she returned to her small apartment overlooking Rue Monge. The walls were lined with dictionaries, notebooks, and framed photos. One of her and Esme in front of their old apartment, both laughing at something the camera never captured. Beneath it hung a small plaque. The Esme Rodriguez Literacy Program. Lagos, Nigeria. For every child who reads, the world opens wider. Audra smiled softly. She'd sent her first paycheck to fund it. A local community center had named the reading wing after her grandmother. Each time she thought of it, she imagined Esme's voice saying, "See? Words have wings, my dear." She sat at her desk, pen poised above a letter addressed to the center. To the children reading this, I was once told that my words didn't belong in the rooms where power lived. But now I know those rooms change when you bring your words inside them. Keep reading. Keep asking. Keep translating your world into something better. She signed her name with a flourish and sealed the envelope, smiling through tears. 2 months later, Geneva. The conference hall shimmered with light and glass, filled with translators, diplomats, and scholars. Screens projected live captions in 6 languages. Audra stood behind the lectern, calm but glowing. Her voice, once timid and uncertain, now flowed steady and clear. Language, she said, is not just a bridge between tongues, it is a bridge between truths. To translate is to hold responsibility for meaning, for fairness, for justice itself. Applause rose, respectful, genuine. Jean Mercier nodded proudly from the front row. For a moment, the girl who once feared speaking in boardrooms now commanded an international stage. When the session ended, a woman approached her, a reporter, notebook in hand. "You were the translator involved in the Washington freight scandal, weren't you?" Audra paused. "Yes." The reporter smiled. "I thought so. Funny, isn't it? Mr. Washington's giving a talk this week, too, on business ethics and corporate accountability. Quite the transformation." Audra's brows lifted slightly. "Granville, Washington." The reporter nodded. "Tomorrow, at the World Commerce Forum. He's part of the Reform Committee now." Audra hesitated, something like disbelief rippling through her chest. "The world has a strange sense of irony," she murmured. The next day, she attended the session quietly, sitting near the back of the packed hall. Granville Washington stood at the podium, older now. The arrogance had faded from his face. His hair was streaked with gray, his posture slightly stooped. But his voice still carried the same power, restrained this time, deliberate. He spoke of transparency, reform, and rebuilding trust. Of how companies must prioritize ethical translation and oversight. There was even humility in his tone, the kind that comes not from defeat, but from reckoning. When he finished, the audience applauded politely. As he stepped down from the stage, his gaze drifted across the room and stopped. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, time seemed to fold in on itself. The marble corridors, the laughter, the humiliation. All of it compressed into this one quiet moment. Granville's expression shifted, surprise, recognition, then something softer. Regret, perhaps. Or gratitude he couldn't voice. Audra nodded once, not with bitterness, but with peace. She had outgrown the battlefield they'd once shared. He inclined his head slightly in return, a silent acknowledgement. Then he turned away. Outside, Paris unfolded in the distance, the Seine glimmering beneath afternoon sun, the hum of languages floating in the air. Audra walked along the embankment, her thoughts drifting between past and present. Every step felt like a translation of its own, of pain into power, silence into speech. Her phone buzzed, a message from the literacy center back home. A photo appeared, children in blue uniforms holding up books, their smiles bright and unguarded. Beneath it, a caption. "Thank you, Miss Audra. We're learning to read the world." She stopped walking, her breath catching in her chest. Above the bridge, the church bells began to ring, their sound carrying over the water like a benediction. She lifted her eyes to the skyline, Notre Dame spires, the golden dome of Les Invalides, and whispered softly, "We did it, Mamie." A voiceover would have captured it best, the quiet reflection of a woman who had turned wounds into wisdom. Some words break you. others rebuild the world. And as she crossed the bridge, sunlight glancing off the water, it was clear. The girl who was mocked for reading had learned to make the world listen. Not with defiance, not with vengeance, but with grace and words that would outlive them all.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.